the parking lot here, the Bay Club at the gateway here, what used to be called Golden Gate Tennis and Swim Club, but then the Bay Club bought it. As it presently is, the club and the parking lot block off these two city streets from getting through to the waterfront. Pacific through here would have to turn this way, and Jackson through here would have to turn this way, dogleg around to get to the waterfront. So this is a kind of a land use pattern, and for those who only know me as a grassroots activist, I used to be a city planner here in San Francisco for 30 years, and I was at the port 5 years at the end. I retired in 2001, so I've been well out of the game, and I'm just here as a volunteer like I do everything else these days. Opening up the street grid is one of the really important things that planners care about, so you can have ease of connections throughout the city. And something that I've been really very excited about in this proposal is that it opens up the street grid to enable the streets to go through, and it does that by squeezing the club. The Bay Club will stay there, it will be smaller, it will lose 9 tennis courts, and that is the real impact of the project. It is a private club, and in return you get the opening up of the grid, and you get a real activation, real energizing of the Embarcadero in these 3 blocks between Broadway and Washington Street. Actually, would you mind stepping a little back? I feel I saw a lot of overshadowed in this.
What's in your ear?
It squeezes the club to let the streets go through, and this is a way both for people to get from the city to the waterfront and from the waterfront back into the city. Can you see this okay, Max?
Yeah, I'll just jump up and jump
Great,
down.
okay, so there are pedestrian walkways through here, bicycle path through here, this whole area, a public park built at no cost to the city here, a cafe here to help energize the park, the smaller club here with improved aquatics and physical fitness, but it's still a club, and a cafe here, and then the housing over retail, and the retail would be that type of ground level space that's meant to energize sidewalks and activate the waterfront and get people interested in walking along their cafes, shop restaurants, etc. And all the parking gets underground, and the parking that is undergrounded is not only what's on the site here, but what had been at Pier Half over here and was lost a couple years ago, and over at Sinbad's Restaurant over here, that's soon to be lost for the next phase of the downtown ferry terminal. So the housing is 134 units, 5 and 6 stories here, 8 and 12 stories here. The overall zoning for the site would have allowed 693 units, but of course no one would ever pick out like that along the waterfront. So of the 134 units, these are market rate condos, and as part of the city's affordable housing programs, there's a city affordable housing fund in which a developer can either build on site, 20% of the units on site, or can build off site, also 20%, or can make a comparable contribution to the city's affordable housing fund, also 20%, which in this case $9 million. So this developer, in going to the board of supervisors, to get through the board of supervisors, increased that to 25%, $11 million, which for the 134 units here would mean 34 units to be built as part of the city's affordable housing program within a 1-mile radius of the project. John Stewart of the John Stewart Company has done a ton of affordable housing, says that with these monies coming into the city, it can leverage these monies and can probably end up producing about 50 to 55 units of affordable units. And that's important to get those monies in, because now, without redevelopment, there's just nobody.
I know some of you. Those of you I don't, I'm campaign director for No Wall on the Waterfront. I sit on the Ports Northeast Waterfront Advisory Committee. I've been a neighborhood and environmental activist for years. So just maybe starting where Alec left off, why is the Sierra Club, Democratic Party, Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods, virtually every Democratic club in town, Blue River Chew, Apples, Compost, opposed to Propositions B and C? You didn't really talk about the propositions, that's what we're here to talk about. So our fact sheet and our handout talks about what's on the ballot. And certainly there are some attractive features to the project. The reason this is a fight, the reason there's not just one but two ballot measures on 8 Washington is that the developer has proposed raising waterfront height limits to build that project to more than twice the height of the old Embarcadero Freeway, which is what's on the cover of our brochure. The biggest sort of spot zoning, upzoning on our waterfront in a generation, over 40 years. It sets a horrible precedent for the series of lots, what's not included in the model, and why this really is, it's their political picture, it's not their picture, because this is about the waterfront. And this building, while downtown is here, the waterfront stretches up to Fisherman's Wharf and down Candlestick. And the rest of the northern waterfront from the ferry building to the wharf is actually zoned at 40 feet. And this band is a little bit higher because the freeway was there. But the precedent for raising the height limit there absolutely sets the table for raising the height limits in other parts of our waterfront, no doubt about it. And that's something the Sierra Club, environmental groups, neighborhood groups are being imposed. And that's what Proposition C and D both do. They're twins in that kind of core regard. They both raise height limits from 84 feet to 136. The other issue, really there are two issues. Raising waterfront height limits and setting, becoming the first brick in a wall on the waterfront is the core opposition to both B and C. It's also about what kind of housing we want. And as Alex did say, the most important, valuable part of this property is the corner that's owned by you, the public. The port parcel is used as a parking lot, which no one thinks is the best use. Everyone thinks should become either housing or retail or open space or something. The question is what? The project market rate condos, in this case, according to the developer, will be an average of $5 million each. $2.5 million to $10 million is the range the developer provided to the Board of Supervisors. About $5 million each. And 134 units of all luxury condos. The developer had every ability and was encouraged and declined to build a mixture of affordable, middle class, other types of housing on the site, declined. And it's incredibly sort of misleading to claim that this is an affordable housing project. In fact, 134 units at $5 million each is more than $600 million. They're going to put in 11 to the Affordable Housing Fund. That's about 2%, less than 2% of what they would build. And is it all that the law requires? Yes, but this is an incredibly valuable part of our city. It's up to the voters to make the decision, and our message and the message of Affordable Housing Alliance, the Housing Rights Committee, and tenants groups is to vote no on B and C. We should demand that developers like this don't just build luxury condos and pay off the fee, but actually build real affordable housing on site so that average people have a chance to afford it. And if we're going to build new communities, why should we be building gated luxury condo communities in the most important part of our city? Shouldn't we demand more? So let me just also say, the other two, the difference between the propositions, really they're twins. So in essence, if you're for the project and the height increase, you should vote yes on B and C, which is what they're saying. If you're against the height increase in the luxury condos, you should vote no on B and C. There is one difference. The C is the referendum, is what our group last summer and citizens across the city collected 30,000+ signatures to put on the ballot. It's a challenge. The reason we're saying no, it's a little funky, because it's a referendum. So it's a thumbs up or thumbs down on the Board of Supervisors' decision to up the height limit. It's unusual, it's rarely done, but this is an extreme circumstance. And the project would have been built by now if we hadn't challenged it at that point. That's C. So B is the developer's response. I think most of you probably know that this spring the developer spent about $300,000 paying signature gatherers and qualified B, which also really does the same thing, but wraps sort of the 10-word height increase language in 10,000 words of very attractive parks, jobs, housing language. It does do a couple different things that raise additional concerns. So former planning director Alan Jacobs is opposed to Prop B in particular because it would create a loophole that would allow the developer to not go to the zoning administrator, but to go to the planning director if the project's approved. And as the initiative actually says, which I have, I'm going to pass around, this is Prop B, takes it out of the hands of the planning director. So for those reasons, we're hoping you will join us in no on B and C.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now let's get into questions. And I feel as though, in terms of the size of the project, you covered it to a point where maybe others would want to ask questions. But I want to ask about accessibility, actually. I want to change up to accessibility. The John, you brought up gates, and whether it's gated or whether it's not gated. And I think, Al kind of furrowed his brow on that one, so it's probably a good one to discuss.
Sure.
But also the loss of public space, if you guys could touch on that. Maybe that'll be a second question, but let's, instead of the two questions I was going to ask myself. So let's start with that. When you say it's a gated
Sure.
community,
Yeah.
how is it going to be gated?
Sure.
and
This
how
is,
will it-
so this is their initiative with their maps, so you're not taking my word for it. And this is sort of the developer's portrayal of the site and the developer's portrayal of their project on a land use scale. So I'm going to pass it around. But you see the housing community, which is the essence of the project, on the most valuable piece of property where the buildings are, will have a gate at the front and a security guard to get in. And they include in their, the claim in the brochures that half the project will be new open space and recreation. They include the open space and trees inside the luxury housing in that calculation. They also include the terraces and decks on the luxury condos. It is true that they will add about a tennis court size space to the northern tip of the project to the open space that's there now. And much of what's there is already green space. It's not as nice looking as it will be. So that's an accurate claim. They also do create the walkway, and that's true, but that's something that's required. So I'll pass it around so you can look at the map and let Alec respond.
I'll pass my copy around also. Okay, yeah, so,
How is it not gated? Or how
Okay.
is it gated?
okay. This is a condominium complex, and it has an entryway, and that entryway, I have not seen precise plans, but it is an entryway, and the space between those two buildings is part of the condominium complex, and is not part of the open space or recreation space that the developer and our campaign has been talking about. 51% of the site is either the club or the open spaces around it. 30,000 the open spaces, and 38,000 for the club. The tennis court is about 7,000 square feet, and we're talking 12,000 square feet over here, a little bigger than tennis court, and 10,000 square feet over here, also bigger than the tennis court. And I just do not see the point of really trying to denigrate open space along the waterfront, which is a valuable thing for everybody.
But it is
Hold on. You're right, Richard. But,
Yeah.
point-
For
point
here,
being-
I don't know, I'm not sure, this is the first time that particular issue's come up, and I don't know exactly what the entryway is going to be here, but clearly this is part of the space that's associated with this housing development. I don't think anyone's ever argued that.
But there will be a checkpoint for public accessibility.
Into that space, I don't know.
Okay.
I've never heard this come up before.
Sure, and then, I guess we'll move on at that point. So my other question is actually for accessibility. Remember, Johnny, write questions down and then.
No, I thought Max.
Yeah, Maxwell.
Oh.
So, to accessibility, now, there's been a lot of talk that there will be a loss of accessibility and that the public space will be smaller. Can you talk to how that would not be true, or of how it is scaled down, how it still maintains an appropriate size of accessibility for the public?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I'm not sure what the public access on the site is now, unless it's like this tiny area through here, which has got a couple fenced areas within it that don't show on this drawing, or the parking lot, which is public access. You can access the parking lot. And so this club is not public access now. The same club, albeit smaller, is not going to be public access either, but all this other area around it, and this black line marks the property line, is going to be public access. This walkway gets expanded. These walkways through to the Embarcadero are clearly public access. This park is access. These wider sidewalks are all public access. I just have never understood how people can say that this reduces public access.
Sure. Sure. I mean, the numbers are that 2/3 of their claimed new open space and recreation would be private, not public. And Alec mentioned it, but let me just focus back that sort of their pitch is in part that there's a private health club, tennis club there, that members only and exclusive. They would replace that with another private club that would be more expensive and half the size. And would eliminate a lot of the family-oriented recreation that's been there for generations. So we're not arguing that, I mean, we actually, the only argument I don't belong to the club, but the people who do point out it's private in the sense of the YMCA is also private. You have to pay to go or to join, and the same is true there. So that's replacement. And I will absolutely acknowledge that they add the pathway through Jackson and add about a tennis court to Quaker Park. But that's far cry from a Golden Gate Park and the Embarcadero, which is really what I think the claim of property is, and that's just not true.
Some of you guys, you gotta wait for that.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence that would say, if you have, that would say that it's gonna cost more?
To join?
Yeah. Is there been any information put out there?
Yes, about the club. It's the way the Bay Club's in the pitch. The Bay Club would be smaller and more high end. I mean, that's the terminology they're using is, upscale, high end, fancier. It hasn't been promoted, so I don't think they put up fees yet. But you compare it to other Bay Clubs. There are other Bay Clubs in town.
So just would you say that's fair or unfair?
I think it's very fair. It's the same Bay Club. When you join one Bay Club, you have the ability to participate in all the other Bay Clubs.
Okay, good. And then, so let's move on to housing now. I'll back to you. We generally wrote an article for the club about a month ago. I don't know if you know the
Let me see. We communicated.
In that article, Calvin Welch made a comment that he thought the affordable housing for this project is insufficient to offset the demand created for the affordable housing. Can you talk about the affordable housing aspect of this project, and also how it would help to create, how it would help to, fill the vacuum of affordable housing needed in the city of San Francisco?
Okay, well, you have to start with the marketing. No one's going to build housing unless they're able to get the money to build the house. And there are two ways people can get the money to do housing. They can either do it by selling houses for more. They can do it market rate and they sell it for more than it costs to build it. Or they can do it affordable housing, in which they have to get money from a number of different sources in order to build the affordable housing. And typically it could take 4 or 5 different funding sources to be able to come up with a package that's enough to make affordable housing work. So the city decided that when people do market rate housing, they should have to contribute to affordable housing through any of those 3 means that I mentioned, that I said earlier, either on-site, building it themselves off-site, or contributing to the city affordable housing fund. And by contributing to the city affordable housing fund, as I mentioned, that money can be leveraged with other monies like federal low-income tax credits or whatever other programs there are, and you can actually turn those dollars into more dollars. And as I said, the guy who's done a lot of affordable housing all over says that this could end up resulting in about 50 to 55 affordable housing units, which is more than the city assumes when it says that it should be either 20%, which is the 27 units out of this, which is the user number, or 34 units, which is what the developer agreed to do when they went to the board of supervisors. So, if this project does not get built, those market rate units will not happen, and the affordable units that it would help fund are not going to happen. And those affordable units under the city ordinances would have to be built within a 1-mile radius of the site.
Affordable housing groups, Affordable Housing Alliance, Township Union Housing Rights Committee are all opposed to Prop B and C. Why? Because we need to demand more. I think it's becoming conventional wisdom that we have enough ultra-luxury housing in this town for the wealthy and not enough affordable middle-class housing. The question is, how do we fix that balance? The fact this came to the ballot as a height limit issue. I actually think it's going to be a referendum on what kind of housing we want. And should we accept the deal that's being proposed, or should we demand more? And this is an incredibly valuable part of land. I've heard some people say it's too valuable. Someone on the phone yesterday said, I think it's too valuable to let people who can't afford $10 million condos live there. Yeah. And my response is, especially the public land, San Francisco belongs to all of us. And okay, if we're gonna let this developer or Donald Trump or whoever put only ultra luxury, we should demand 50% affordable housing, not 2%. And if it's not going to be built on site, we want it to be built, not put into a fund. We want in hand rather than promised. We're getting none of that with these propositions. And with Prop B, the developer is trying to get the people to stamp approved his project. If they do, it's going to be a precedent for other developers to refer back to and do the same thing. Either go to the ballot or say, hey, the people of this town are fine with luxury housing with 2% affordable housing, and that's going to become, something we'll have to push back on.
It's great to be comparing this developer to move down from. They have their offices here, they've been historic rehab of these piers here, they are locally based, committed to waterfront. Their studio and one bedroom should be priced under $1 million, not $27 million.
So I'm assuming you, and this is the next one.
Sure.
So I'm assuming you would believe Kelly Washington. You would agree with Kelly Washington.
I think I haven't read, but he's a supporter of our coalition, right?
So you know, the groups that support and believe that and all that. But can you talk a little bit more in depth about how if they really do 55 units, how that could be insufficient, or
they're not
what
proposing.
their plans are?
Sure, they're not proposing to do 55 units. They're proposing to give $11 million to the city's affordable housing fund. Period. That's all the developers. That's all the initiative says. That's all the developers. They're creating new figures to try to make it sound better. And yes, they've got an affordable housing developer who's backing them up. The inclusionary, I've actually learned a lot more about the inclusionary housing fund from this campaign and spoken to groups like yours across town. And the perception I actually had before this was that 20% of the value of the condos would have to be put into a fund. We want the developers to build the housing, right? That's what we want. It's for every project to have at least a modicum of middle-class, affordable class housing. But they have a way out. I thought that it's not true. It's the cost of construction. That's why it's so low. So that's why we need to actually talk about the $600 million figure of what these will actually bring in versus the $11 million they're putting in. So I guess I would just end by saying the way they're trying to frame this is if you don't approve this, it's going to be a parking lot for the rest of your natural born lives. No other developer is going to do it because whatever. I think that's an extraordinarily misleading claim and hard, I think, for most people. Because that lot and the other 3 lots that are also parking lots owned by the people managed by the port at Bay and Embarcadero, at Green and Embarcadero, Broadway and Embarcadero and Bay, are just like this. All of them are too valuable to leave as parking lots forever, and the port wants something to happen there. And I think either this developer will come back with a better project, or another developer will be next in line and say, hey, we'll do something that will bring in money, be something that people can live with, and the community, I think, absolutely wants something to happen and not for it to remain fallow.
The club members have beat back 3 other projects in the past. They want nothing to happen here. No change. That's where the opposition started. The developer has tried to work with them and gotten nowhere.
Activists, neighborhood leaders, environmentalists from across the city. So Mayor, I just actually come up and say a few words.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for taking part of your last days of our great summer and early fall down here on a Saturday morning for this campaign. It's extremely important, and I'm very grateful to you, and I want to acknowledge you for it. I also want to acknowledge John, who's done a magnificent job. You've seen and heard a lot. A relatively new part of the campaign, Anand Singh.
Oh, Anand.
Coordinating a lot of the activities that John's talking about. Obviously, I want to acknowledge my favorite supervisor, or former supervisor, former president of the board. It's like, and just tell you how important he has been to this campaign and to the city.
Aaron Kessler, for one.
Oh,
You didn't say
yeah, Aaron. Aaron, the reason I'm here, I'm not being paid. I'm not, I don't live down here like a number of you. I'm not running for anything. But I'll tell you why I'm really here. Aaron has promised that he will lead the effort in the next year to name the Golden Gate Bridge after me. Actually, Aaron has said something, I think, that will stand to the ages in this city, which is that it appears that every generation has to stand up in this city to remind the developers and those who would build out things that are inappropriate for this city that this generation will not stand for. They think that it's forgotten. What was done in the last generation or in the generations before that, we won't go through all that history because John has warned me not to take too much time. We need to get to work. But here's our test. Here's our test. 22 years ago, we took down the Embarcadero Freeway. It was a controversial decision, believe it or not. 22,000 people wanted it up, but we succeeded in taking it down and creating the newest precious place in this city. I think it is on a par with Chrissy Field, which is a magnificent new place in our city that people can go close to the bay and the water. It's, I think, on a par with the Presidio, which is another new precious place that has been created in this generation. And I think the waterfront today, since we have created what is now the Embarcadero roadway and boulevard and all that comes with it, with restored ferry buildings and public piers on either side and the newest jewel and the exploratorium, cruise ship terminals, parks, and all that, is a precious place for all of the city. And as I've gone around this campaign, and I've had over 30 contacts that have been arranged for me to go speak from the outer Sunset to Hunters Point, there is unanimity that people understand that the waterfront doesn't belong to Telegraph Hill, doesn't belong to Fisherman's Wharf. It belongs to every San Franciscan, and that we have to fight for it. That's what this is about. And that's why I think we are going to win, and it is going to be a big victory for us. However, it's not any surprise that there's a lot of money against us, and there is a lot of misinformation being put out there, and that's our job. That's what's at stake, as John said, in the next 52 days. It is up to us, and we need to grow this group to go out and tell people what is at stake. I have found, when I do it, and have been doing it, that people get it, and they respond, and I believe that we're going to have a big victory. But we can't do it without the kind of work that you're all about to do, and I'm grateful for it. Congratulations. Thank you very much.
Now I want to talk about the 11 steps to fascism, and this is part of the prison industry. So the first step to fascism is to invoke a threat, like the war on terror. And then the second step might be to establish secret prisons.